Hello, First Church family. Miss you all like crazy. Hope you are safe and sane. So I thought as this kind of shelter-in-place order wears on, that maybe we should do some Bible study from a safe social distance. So over the next couple of weeks, I thought let's work our way through the book of Genesis. I think we should go pretty slow through the really dense material at the beginning of the book, and then we can sort of speed up as we move through the more narrative portions. So a little bit of background first. Genesis, as you know, is the first book of the Hebrew Bible, or the Christian Old Testament. Its name comes from a Latin word that means origins. And so, of course, this is what the book is all about, how various things came into being. How are human beings created? Why do we cover our bodies with clothes? Why do snakes crawl on their bellies? Why are there so many different languages in the world? It's all right there in the book of Genesis. But that's led to some confusion about the way this book, or at least its first several chapters, work. So on the one hand, modern kind of fundamentalists have insisted that Genesis be read as a literal scientific description of the formation of the world and of its early history. This is almost certainly not what the authors intended. On the other hand, a lot of us reject that literalistic reading, but we've ceded this book to the fundamentalists. We say, I believe in science and the Big Bang and in evolution, so I don't really have much use for Genesis. Well, I want to suggest that this view is just as wrong as the fundamentalist one. The first chapters of Genesis are no more bad and inaccurate and outdated science and history than they are good science and history. That's just not what the book is trying to do. Instead, I think we could categorize at least the first 11 chapters or so of Genesis as mythology. Now, when I say that Genesis is myth, don't hear me saying that it's not true. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is, in part, that it doesn't do the modern thing of equating truth with historical and scientific factuality. Myth explores deep truths about God and the world and humanity through the media of image and story and imagination. So one ancient author said that myth describes nothing that ever was, but what always is. So, will Genesis tell you exactly how the world came into being? No, you'll have to take a physics class for that. But will it guide you into deep questions about just what kind of world we're living in? You bet. Okay, so traditionally, Genesis, along with the next 4 books of the Bible, which together make up the Torah, is attributed to Moses, even though none of the books themselves actually claims to be written by Moses. So, we know this is not the case. First of all, in the last chapter of the last book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, Moses dies. So obviously he didn't write that chapter at least. But we know from some complicated textual and linguistic analysis that I won't get into here, that the Torah didn't have a single author. Rather, it's a compilation of stories that went through at least 4 major revisions. And we know that it came into something like the form that we have now about 400 or 500 years before the time of Jesus. That dating is actually really important for understanding what's happening in Genesis chapter 1. Because not long before that, probably around the time that Genesis started to be written, Babylon swallowed up Judah in its imperial expansion. They destroyed the temple, they executed the royal family, and they took many of the survivors into captivity. It's from here that the psalmist writes, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion." Our captors asked us for songs, saying, "Sing to us the songs of Zion." But how could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? So this is the context in which Genesis 1 is written. Okay, but now you have to read the text before we can go any further. So go ahead, pause the video, and go get a Bible and read the first chapter of Genesis. I'll wait here. Okay, good. Now, there are 3 things I'd like for us to notice about this text. The first thing that you probably noticed when you read the chapter is that there's a kind of cyclical poetic rhythm to this text. It's almost like a liturgy. God said, "Let there be," and there was. God saw that it was good. God separated, then God named it. There was evening and there was morning. God said, "Let there be," there was. It was good. God separated, named, evening and morning, rinse and repeat. The second thing to notice is the order in which the things are created. First, there's sky. Well, first, God turns on the lights so they can see. Then there's sky. And you probably noticed that it's described as a dome that separates the waters from the waters. That's because if you're an ancient person, you'll notice that the water falls down from the sky. So there must be water up there somewhere. But also, if you dig down far enough, you'll hit water down there too. So it makes sense that we're just surrounded by water on all sides and that we live in something like a protective bubble called sky. After the sky, there's land, which is made by clearing away the waters below the sky, pushing them to one side or the other. And then the waters themselves are separated. So there are these three spaces: sky, land, and water. And then God begins filling the spaces. First, hanging lights in the sky, then birds to fly across them, then fish and sea monsters for the waters, then creeping things and wild animals for the land. It sort of sounds like a building project, almost like God is building the rooms of their house and then decorating them. Finally, did you notice that God didn't create everything in Genesis 1? Look at verse 11. Let the earth put forth vegetation, like spontaneous generation. That one's not too weird because we're used to vegetables bursting forth from the earth. But what about verse 20? Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures. Or verse 24, let the earth bring forth creeping things and wild animals of every kind. So we've got a building project, a house for God, in which there's a liturgical, cyclical rhythm to the activity of the house. And every element of the building participates in what is being generated there. Remember, the earth bringing forth, the earth and the water bringing forth. What kind of building is that? It's a temple. So what are the compilers and editors of Genesis 1 saying to a people who, exiled in Babylon, feel cut off from the center of life and energy? A people that feel they cannot worship without a temple, that they cannot sing the songs of Zion in a foreign land? They're saying, fear not. The whole world is a temple. The earth is filled to the brim with God's glory. Maybe you're feeling disconnected, separated from your friends and your family and church. Maybe you feel like the psalmist, wondering, how can I sing or feel joy at a time like this? Well, this text reminds us that the whole world is God's temple. So this week, I challenge you to take note of one place where you find the presence of God, where you feel the presence of God, even as you're far away from church and all the things that you normally associate with the center of God's life and energy. And then we'll see you next week, and we'll look at Genesis chapter 2.